Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Marshall Leno, and I am thrilled to host this webinar that we're calling the Peer Review: Trends, Blind Spots, and Priorities from over 240 construction leaders. Before we get going today, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is recorded, so all of you that are listening live and those that registered that couldn't make it, you will be receiving a recorded copy as soon as this webinar is over. During this webinar, we welcome any questions that the audience has, and just please use the chat function that's in the meeting software to submit your questions, and we'll do our best as time allows to get to all your questions at the end. We are definitely going to save some time at the end for some of your questions. So whether you're a contractor or you work with construction companies, we hope that you find today's webinar both insightful and valuable. Performance roundtables are an important resource in the toolkit of construction leaders. In those roundtables, leaders share what's happening in their companies, including the challenges that don't appear on financial statements. Today, we're going to talk about the things that your peers are already navigating. Some will sound familiar, and some will be worth your attention before they become urgent. At Performance Construction Advisors, we service the construction industry, and I'm thrilled to bring to you two of our excellent consultants. I'll start with Kevin. Kevin Albanese is a Silicon Valley-based construction industry thought leader and a senior consultant with Performance Construction Advisors. He advises construction executives and boards across the U.S. on succession planning, strategic leadership, and risk mitigation. Kevin brings to us nearly 4 decades of hands-on industry experience, rooted in his family's concrete and general engineering firm in Northern California. And when his father passed away unexpectedly in 2014, Kevin stepped in to lead the company through an unplanned ownership transition. And he put into practice the very strategies that he shares today. And the results speak for themselves. Revenue grew at his firm by more than 63% under his leadership as CEO, while the profits grew exponentially. With that lived experience navigating the family dynamics, complex organizational challenges, and high stakes of running a large construction firm is what Kevin brings to every engagement at Performance Construction Advisors. He delivers proven, real-world guidance on strategic planning, succession, and the business of contracting. And also joining us is Bill Egger. Bill brings over 25 years of executive leadership experience with deep roots in the construction industry. He started work at a residential site work contractor at the age of 12, washing equipment and helping in the shop. And since that early beginning, he has served as Vice President of Corporate Development and as a Chief Administrative Officer at EBCO General Contractors in Texas. There, he led the strategic and business plan efforts, focusing on diversifying the company's markets, leading technology and process improvements, and transforming their business model. He's also served as a president and CEO of an engineering and manufacturing firm, driving 25% annual sales growth and leading the company through a successful turnaround. Today, in his role with Performance Construction Advisors, Bill facilitates our CEO Performance Roundtables, and he partners with our construction company owners and leadership teams on growth, strategy, succession planning, and organizational performance. Kevin and Bill, thank you for joining us today on our webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Marshall.
So one of the core offerings that we offer is CEO Performance Roundtables. In our roundtables, we assemble groups of similar non-competing companies. Our roundtables are host model format, where at every meeting, the group does a deep dive in the operations of one of the group companies. We confidentially interview all of the firm's employees, and we compare what the leaders think to what the field surveys actually say. The peers then prepare a SWOT on the host company, and then the peers provide the host with their findings and their recommendations. We've analyzed over 111 of these roundtable meetings over the past 2 years. So this is current real-time data on this construction market, and that's what we're going to share with you today. And the contractors in these groups include general contractors, civil firms, and specialty trades. We have contractors doing a few million in revenue to over $1 billion in annual revenue. So let's get into it. Let's see what the trends are telling us. So we can see right now 3 things that are emerging, and they center around culture, through execution, and they revolve around people. I'm going to turn over to Bill right now to walk us through how those work.
Yeah, thank you, Marshall. Appreciate the opportunity. So lots of good news that came out of our data. And I want to emphasize this is real data. This isn't just, and at all levels of the companies, not just the CEO. When we do our surveys, we're talking to folks in the office. We're talking to folks, project managers, field superintendents, folks that are on the project site. So really valid data that we've collected. So let's start with culture as a competitive advantage. So one of the strongest themes that we got from the data was that culture is becoming even a more significant business differentiator than probably many of us realize. Okay, so we used to think about culture, talk about culture as kind of an HR initiative, something a little soft, how people feel to work there. It's a nice to have. But right now what we're seeing is that it's really there's a much stronger connection between culture and business performance than we realized and than we think a lot of owners realize. So companies that responded to our survey data that had strong scores in things like trust, communication, accountability, leadership effectiveness, collaboration amongst the teams, they tended to perform better as a company across a wide range of business outcomes. So, why does this matter? Why does culture matter? I know we're construction folks, sometimes not an area we want to think a lot about or talk a lot about. Well, competitors can, they can copy certain things about your company. They can probably copy the kind of technology you use. They can try and copy your compensation. They can try and copy your processes. But what they can't easily copy is how your people actually work together. And that's where culture comes in and is really important. Culture influences your decision making, how you solve problems, how your leaders in the company respond under pressure. And at the end of the day, that really affects how the customers experience you in your company. So we found that when culture is strong, when it improves, execution improves.
Absolutely, Bill.
Yeah.
And it's those intangibles that are really hard to define and describe that inspire our field folks that are out there. A lot of companies could put up buildings, a lot of companies could build a bridge, could build a road. But those that do it with people that understand why it matters and are willing to go to the mat for the logo on their vest or the sticker on their hard hat, that's where we're seeing real differentiation and performance in our client base.
Yeah. And as we look across the organizations that responded, that we deal with, those strongest organizations, they're not treating culture as kind of something that just happens naturally anymore. They're really trying to be deliberate about preserving their culture, about what the behaviors are that are acceptable. They communicate those. They're accountable for modeling those behaviors. So, we like to say culture is what happens, is how the work gets done when your schedules start to tighten, when problems start popping up, when leadership's not in the room. So, good news is we are seeing that companies being deliberate about it and treating it as a real competitive advantage. A second piece of the good news that we saw from our data is the industry's moving kind of from the planning cycle into the execution cycle. Over the last couple of years, especially in the beginning, we started taking this data. They're focused on planning, strategic planning, succession planning, technology planning. Here comes AI. What are we going to do with that? Leadership development. And they spend a lot of time on that. So the conversation we're seeing is shifting a bit. They're not saying, what should we do? What they're saying is, how should we do it? How are we going to get it done? Many of you in the audience, I'm sure, have a strategic plan. You either have one, you're working on one, or you need to work on one. And that'll help you define the right priorities, help you define where you need to improve. But where we have seen the progress kind of stall is getting the execution of those plans done. We're all busy, get consumed in day-to-day operations, and our initiatives just kind of tend to lose momentum. So the leading firms are really becoming disciplined about this. They're focused on those few priorities that are urgent and important, not just urgent, not just important, but urgent and important. They're making sure there's clear ownership for those priorities, and they're being much more consistent about reviewing progress, holding people accountable.
And this is one of those vestiges that kind of hangs out after COVID, right? We had so much uncertainty in the 2020 to the 2022 timeframe with the supply chain issues, inflation, interest rates, and whatnot. And as our clients began to get some certainty and some predictability with the marketplace, 24 was there, oh, we need to build a plan, and 25 is where the ones that are setting themselves apart are actually implementing those plans and those priorities.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Yep.
And I guess the third one, just to talk about quickly, the employee experience. So you go back a couple years, and it's still a problem. Talent is one of the primary concerns that we hear in our roundtables and from the survey data. But we're starting to see the nature of that shift. We used to focus mainly on recruiting. Can we find people for our company? Now there's a lot more conversations going on around retention and how to keep employees engaged. So many folks have found they can attract talent, but can they keep them? And it matters a lot to construction companies and any industry, but particularly in construction, where we seem to have a really strong talent shortage. The labor market's highly competitive. Folks that are looking at your company, they have options, and they do care about benefits for sure. Salary and benefits are those foundational items. You have to get them right. But we find that when people leave, it's not just because of that. It's oftentimes little reasons that have little to do with compensation and benefits. It's all about communication. It's about growth opportunities and career paths. It's about their engagement with the leadership team. It's about, do they feel valued by the organization? Do they feel connected to the organization? And when we lose somebody, we're not losing just a good employee. We're losing the knowledge that walks out the door with them, the relationships they have internally and externally. Perhaps we're losing a future leader, someone who had leadership potential. So the cost can be pretty significant. The leading companies that we deal with, they're really focused on being deliberate about designing that employee experience. They're investing in leadership development. They're identifying and providing clear career paths, focus on communication, those sorts of things that make employees feel connected to the organization, feel that they're recognized and they're valued by the organization. So, we no longer compete just for customers, for projects. Now we're definitely in a battle for talent, and that employee experience and keeping those employees that have learned your ways of doing things and have the knowledge, they're going to determine who wins the battle here.
Absolutely. And it starts from that attraction through recruitment all the way through retirement. And, the contractors that are setting themselves apart, they're the ones that are managing that whole employee cycle from cradle to grave, from start to finish, and recognizing that we are in a people business. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. Right. The competition's out there. And like I used to tell a lot of folks on my team, I want recruiters calling our people. I want to make sure that we have the best people. And it's your job as managers and leaders to make sure that they don't look somewhere else. And no, well said, Bill.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, guys. So before we move on, love to hear from the audience, those of you that are tuned in. So a poll question is going to pop up in just 1 second. It's going to show up on your screen if technology behaves, and there it is. So take a moment, please, and answer the question. So if you're being honest, where's the biggest gap within your own organization? If you're within construction, or as you see, if you work with the construction market, where are you seeing it? Is it, you know what to do, we're just not doing it? Your field home office teams are not aligned. We do not have a real succession plan, or we're growing faster than our culture can handle. So these are coming in at a frantic pace, which is great to see. Give it just a few more seconds here. We'll kind of see how this group comes in.
We've almost got a tied race there.
It is very tight.
Very tight. All right. So we can stop it. We don't have to go extra time on this one. We can stop it at this point and see it. So looks like very close. I mean, it's literally by 1 or 2 votes. The most common one was we're growing faster than our culture can handle, followed by we know what to do, we're just not doing it, and do not have a real succession plan. So great. Thanks for doing that. So let's talk about those. Let's look at each of these a little bit more. So we just covered 3 things that are working really well. So now we're going to look at 5 areas, and these are cracks that we're seeing, issues are starting to become more common in the industry. So these are role clarity and the decision rights in the company, the burnout and the workload strain of managing a large amount of work, the field ops divide and how they perceive the business, and succession gaps in the industry, and in particular below the C-suite, and then the cultural erosion that comes with scaling. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin now to walk us through the start of these topics.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marshall. And thanks again to everybody for joining us here today. When we analyzed the data across both years, one pattern showed up more than any other. And it wasn't about cash flow. It wasn't about safety or even talent retention. It was often that people didn't know who owned what. And what we're really talking about here is a misalignment between responsibility and authority. Someone's held accountable for an outcome, but doesn't have the actual authority to make the decisions that drive it. Or alternatively, the people that have the authority to decide aren't deciding, and others are taking matters into their own hands. That's not a people problem. That's an organizational problem. And what do we do as contractors? Instead of fixing the structure, we're seeing that people they're working around it. They route decisions through whoever is good at making the decision, or candidly, who won't say no, based upon their personality, their relationships, rather than what their defined role is. It might feel efficient in the short term, but if you build your org chart around individuals and not functions, when that person leaves, your whole system wobbles. And certainly for those of you that are familiar with the Peter Principle, the idea that people rise to their highest level of incompetence, as contractors, I think we go to lengths to perfect it. We promote our best project engineer to project manager, our best project manager, project executive. And we never stop to ask if the new role's been defined well enough for anyone to succeed in it. And often we don't provide the skills or the training necessary for success in that higher role. Here's the challenge though. You can't write a rule or organizational structure for every situation. Projects in business, as you know, move way too fast. So what actually keeps decisions from going off the rails isn't some policy manual. It's having a strong value-based culture that gives people the guardrails to make judgment calls within the right boundaries, even when nobody's watching. That's what prevents a bad decision outside someone's scope from becoming a catastrophic one. Fix starts with structure, define the roles, and assign the authority, and hold people accountable.
Yeah, Kevin, that role clarity, so we talk a lot about, we encourage collaboration, and there can be some confusion between where does collaboration end and accountability begin, right? Who's going to have to make the decision when? And goes back to that comment you made about confusion about ownership. Who's responsible for what? And that role clarity is really important from an organizational performance standpoint. If you understand responsibility, authority, you're going to make decisions faster. The whole organization is going to move faster. And when it moves faster, people aren't as frustrated. And we've all experienced that, right? Waiting on a decision. It can really be frustrating, and you end up just with people kind of more people than you need, maybe working on the same problem because you haven't been clear about that accountability.
Exactly. The next one that popped up on our list somewhat caught us off guard. In 2024, burnout barely registered as concerns of the firms that we studied. But by 2025, it has become one of the most urgent systemic threats we've documented. That shift alone in a single year should get everyone's attention. So what changed? Nothing. And that's the problem. The same root causes we just talked about with role clarity are now showing up in the human cost with burnout and fatigue. We never solved the workforce supply problem, never rebuilt the bench after hiring freezes, promoted people into bigger roles without training them, and the entry and mid-level pipeline just never really recovered for talent. Meanwhile, the work didn't slow down. We saw backlogs grow, and firms looked at those backlogs and saw health. Right? You see a big backlog, you think, hey, you got revenue visibility, we got job security, we got momentum, great economy. But full backlogs running on a depleted team isn't the economic health that we think about. It's a pressure cooker, burning out those few people doing too much of the work. I have one of the clients I get to work with. They also often talk about the too much on too few problem, which really has resonated across the industry and across the data. But here's what leaders are not tracking closely enough. And it's not so much that a project fails, it's that the 2 or 3 people that hold that project together, or sometimes in a smaller company, that company together, quietly decide they're done. We've all heard about quiet quitting. Sometimes it's not so quiet, and it's not a big dramatic exit, and they just resign at the worst possible time. Bottom line, firms that are still chasing top line growth without investing in the people carrying that load are burning their people out. And that burning the people out is creating a huge problem in their foundation of their organization. The backlog may look great on paper, but if you lose the wrong people, you don't lose capacity, you lose that institutional knowledge. Bottom line, the firms that win long-term are the ones investing in their foundation now and for the future.
Yeah, we're delighted to see the strong backlogs. The folks we talked to, even this year, maybe 2026 got up to a little bit of a slower start, but it's coming on strong. And organizations can appear really, really healthy. But as you said, Kevin, that's under the surface. There's those signs of strain that our data is starting to show us. And really, as we said, coming on in late 2025 and into this year. And it is that small. I mean, every company has it. There's the handful of folks that those key leaders that are just, they take on they step up to the plate and they take it on. And that's where that strain is real. We're seeing that is, they might be your project executives, or I guess I'm thinking superintendents, ops leaders, that sort of thing. So you got to watch that leadership fatigue, maybe as a way to put it, of those key individuals.
Absolutely. And sometimes we're our own worst enemy as leadership. We start taking on and we don't start saying no, and allowing people to get away with not having to do their jobs, and we get ourselves burnt out. I just saw a post about that on LinkedIn today. Somebody probably on this webinar talked about. So and just one more comment kind of to hit on, Bill, and this is what we're seeing is on paper, a contractor might look really solid with their backlog, their projections and whatnot. But if they're burning out their folks and they don't have a good structure, that could be problematic for them.
You bet.
Which takes us into the field and office divide. And I got to imagine that just about everybody on this call is chuckling a little bit, as this crack isn't new, right? The tension between field and office has existed for as long as there's been trailers and conference rooms. But what our data is showing now is that this divide has grown significantly wider. And the reasons we think are ones that we've created ourselves as contractors. As part of our process, we survey host companies' employees and compare those survey results, not just with their peers and benchmark, but also we look at how their office staff and field staff respond to the survey. The chasm between the field's outlook and the office's outlook is significantly wider today than in years past. Start with proximity. When remote and hybrid work became normalized, office staff gained flexibility. Last I checked, you can't build a project remotely. You got to be on site. If people are working from home, it's really hard to create that proximity and that closeness. Leadership that used to be visible on job sites, they started showing up less. Bottom line, when your project managers and engineers are managing from behind a screen instead of walking in the field, they notice. Field notices. And that creates a distance. It creates both a physical and a cultural distance that also goes to erode trust. Then you throw on the promotion problem we've been talking about, where we push project engineers into PMs into roles before they're ready. And those consequences, if you have an inexperienced project manager or project engineer, those consequences don't land in the conference room. No, they land with the foreman, they land with the superintendent, they land with the field crew that's trying to execute and build a project that doesn't reflect the reality. The field absorbs those costs of those decisions by people who haven't yet earned the credibility to make them. Then the third piece is effective communication. And I really stress the word effective, because this isn't about more emails. This isn't about being in more meetings. I'm talking about effectively communicating with your field staff. explain to them why. Why do we make this call? Why do we make this schedule change? Why does whatever it is that we're dealing with matter? And when leadership skips that explanation because they're either not out in the field, they're not effectively communicating, or they're sitting behind a screen, that directive, it sends a message inadvertently, whether you want to or not, to the field that their perspective doesn't matter. The firms closing this divide are the ones putting leaders back in the field, slowing down long enough to give explanations to their field personnel, and really genuinely engaging with their field staff and asking them what they see. That feedback loop is free, and it's one of the highest return investments we think a company can make.
One of the things there, I mean, I think we need to recognize as business leaders that the field employees, they often experience a different company than what people in the office do. It's really that simple. And that's why it's so critical, because we always like to say, you know, the field is where the work happens, or the rubber meets the road. That's a common statement that I've heard across the industry for years. And so if they're feeling a disconnect there, you know, it's beyond just the morale concerns. It's engagement, it's communication, it's retention of field employees. And at the end of the day, that, you know, if that gap isn't closed, then you start eroding trust. And that ties back to the culture of the company that we've already talked about. So a lot of times, you know, we don't see it, we don't recognize it early enough. All of a sudden we realize we have a turnover problem, or the project isn't on schedule, there's some sort of performance issue. It was probably because of some underlying issues that happen and are still going on before that time. So I mean, I think companies I work with are really focused on improving communication, really trying to connect the field better with some of the company strategy and the company goals. All right, great. So I'll pick it up at this point. So succession gaps. You know, a lot of companies have realized, especially a lot of our clients are family businesses, they have a need to talk about succession. And that's great. Great, they recognize it, great, they're talking about it. And they're spending a lot of time talking about it at the owner, the CEO level. But what we're not seeing yet, and what our data show us, is we're not seeing as much discussion at the next level or two down. And that's really a lot of times where the greatest risk is. As we talked about, usually there's a handful of people in your organization that are carrying a tremendous load, other ones are really making things happen. And so you're what we call key person dependency. You have that risk in the organization. And we saw that in our survey. So it's not just an ownership transfer. What I'm talking about, when we talk about succession, we talk about it in kind of three buckets: ownership transfer, it's leadership and management transfer, which is that next level or two down, and then it's knowledge transfer. So how are you going to transfer all of that as people start to approach retirements? Maybe they resign because of some of the stress we've talked about. So it's really not challenging just replacing a person. It's far deeper than that. You're replacing relationships and knowledge and experience, credibility, a lot of things. So what are some of the best companies doing? Working on building leadership depth. We're seeing that. We're seeing them identify successors early and then provide development and coaching opportunities. We're seeing a lot of our young leaders come through what we offer, what we call our boot camp. It's an education program that teaches people about all aspects of running a construction business. They're being very intentional about transferring the knowledge. And, you know, they're working on this years in advance. We're always concerned that a company could be one retirement or a resignation or a burnout from really discovering how dependent they are on a key person. And we need to avoid that.
And the best in class, they're being very, very deliberate about that next level. They're taking that same deliberateness, that thought process around ownership and leadership transfer, and really thinking about what that looks like in 5 to 10 years, and being sure that they understand what it's going to take to keep your middle folks engaged and as part of the team. And then building also plans around, God forbid, some sort of contingency or succession need emerges. What's their next step?
Yeah. All right. Let's go on to the next one there. So cultural erosion. So we talked about how important culture is and how it's significant factor in retaining employees and keeping them. And we've also talked about how excited we are that there's strong backlogs and companies are starting to see some real growth. So the challenge is, how do we maintain that culture while continuing to grow? I have a client that I've worked close with for a while now, and they're growing rapidly, and it's great. They've moved into some new geographies, work outside their typical territory, and they've moved up in project size. Two, terrific things that's happening to them. But what they're being very concerned about, they're concerned that their leadership team is not as accessible as it used to be. Maybe the communication isn't as direct as it used to be. And they used to have that great personal connection where everybody knew everybody and you knew a little bit about them on a personal level, and they can't maintain that right now. So, when you're smaller companies, it kind of just develops naturally. People are accessible, communication's one-on-one, it's direct. But as you grow, you get more layers of management. Your processes, we tend to focus on formalizing our processes. We've talked about the communication being more difficult, and we just kind of assume culture is going to take care of itself. And that's not the case. We have to be very deliberate. We have to be very intentional about our culture. And so, if you start to lose that culture, you start to see things like lower engagement. You start to see your turnover go up. So the problem really isn't the growth, though, that I talked about. The problem is maybe more, it's just not managed properly. So as I said, I think in the earlier, when we talked about culture, about being intentional about it, what are the desired behaviors? What are the expectations we have of people? Gets over into the performance management side of it. Holding leadership accountable, that they have to model the proper culture. And recognize, we need to recognize as business leaders that culture is going to drive a lot of the outcomes that we're most concerned about, job performance and that sort of thing. So, I guess a takeaway here would be it's not a function of a bad project or a bad quarter or some thing you run into. It's being really intentional about how you grow and how you're going to maintain that.
And this is not something that you could subcontract to HR or chief culture officer. It needs to be embedded throughout the organization, from the board to the CEO, all the way throughout the organization and modeled all the way through. Awesome. Well done, Bill.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for covering some of those cracks, not just what does it look like within their firms, but also kind of talking through what does better look like. So now that we went through some of the cracks, let's take a look at really what does good look like. For the firms that we work with, that we're fortunate to work with that are with industry, what's going on in those organizations? So first, we're going to focus on the right amount of work, not just getting more work. We're going to talk about investing in the middle layers of an organization, talk about putting structures and accountability around performance. We're going to talk about how groups are going from being aspirational to action-oriented and executing on the plans. And then last but not least, talk about de-risking the growth within their own organizations. So Kevin, can you pick it up from here?
Absolutely. Yeah, focus over volume. And this is not just about revenue. We've spent, obviously, the last several slides talking about cracks. And this is what we're going to talk about what good looks like. And the first thing that separates firms pulling ahead is not what they're doing more of, it's what they're chosen to stop doing. There's a leadership principle that's really simple, but as a contractor, it's hard to live by. Basically, that is, if an organization has too many priorities, it has none. When everything's important, nothing gets the attention that it deserves. And in construction right now, with the market opportunities available, the temptation to say yes to everything is real. But here's a counterintuitive truth. More companies experience significant stress during growth periods than they do during downturns. Growth without discipline is simply chaos, just at a higher revenue amount. The firms that we're seeing that are struggling are not those because the market dried up. It's because they said yes too many times. Firms winning have done something harder than chasing opportunity. They've made deliberate decisions about what markets they serve, project types they pursue, and just as importantly, what they turn away from. Not just for project, but for every technology initiative, every strategic initiative, they have a real go, no go process where they're evaluating it and comparing it to the other priorities that they have and the opportunities that it creates. I say this discipline isn't limiting, it's liberating. When your team isn't stretched across 15 priorities, they could actually execute at a high level at the 5 that are most important and are going to move the needle for your construction organization.
Yeah, great point, Kevin. Yeah, it's being more selective, being more focused, as we've said. You're talking about having many initiatives. I remember when we were doing some strategic planning years ago, and we'd have 50 or more initiatives, and then we'd check back in 90 days later, and nothing had moved. Right? It's just too many. So being selective, and that applies to execution of our kind of business that we're talking about here.
And it's really pervasive in the technology space right now. There's so many shiny objects out there that it's really hard to prioritize what's important. The other thing that we're seeing our successful contractors do is invest in the middle. For just about anything, whether you're selling a business, choosing a contractor, subcontractor for a job, as an individual, who you're going to go work for, when you're talking about surety and bank underwriting, whenever we evaluate an organization, our natural inclination is to look at who's at the top. But the firms that we're seeing executing at the highest level have figured out that their real leverage point is in the middle. These are project executives, general superintendents, regional leaders. That's where the plans for a construction business either get executed or fall apart. And that layer is carrying an enormous amount of weight without the support underneath it. So what are our good contractors doing? And what does good look like? It starts with a really honest inventory of your people. Not just an org chart, but a real assessment of your current people in the middle of your organization, their capabilities, what your blind spots are around them, what their blind spots are around their performance, and where you're generally vulnerable if 1 or 2 key people walk out the door. Then you look at that picture, that honest assessment, and compare it to where you want your organization to be in the next 3 to 5 years. And the gap between, that's your roadmap. Identify your high potentials, high performers, the people that have the capability to drive to that future state. And that's not the same conversation, because high performance today doesn't automatically mean high potential for the next level. And it's important that you recognize the difference. For those on a growth plan, build a real development path, not just annual reviews with great intentions, but structured paths with specific skills, trainings, experiences, and timelines. And be honest about the gaps that you can't fill from within. Where you need talent, build a recruitment plan around those areas that you don't have. The firms that are winning the talent game are not reacting. They're building a bench before they need it. And it's that kind of discipline that makes them sustainable and best in class performance.
Yeah, such an important point, Kevin. I mean, it's that layer of leadership that really every day they're translating your strategy, your business strategy into action, right? That's where the work is happening. They're influencing how the work's getting done, how you're solving problems. They have typically they're the ones that are responsible for the employee development for those that are in their organization. And probably, maybe most importantly, they're the ones that affect how the customer experience the project, which we can't forget about. So being very deliberate about that. And, a lot of times strategies kind of created at the top. Best organizations involve other people, but a lot of times it is an executive team that does it. But your business strategy is going to be delivered through the middle. That's where it gets delivered.
Absolutely.
All right. So this what good looks in the area of what we call plan it, own it, execute it. One of the most consistent differences we uncovered between high performing firms and kind of average performing, it's not the strategy. That's important. Don't want to minimize that, but it's that operating discipline. And you're going to see some recurring themes. You can probably pull a thread through all of these topics because there are some things that do just come out here. So, most of our organizations have good ideas. We got great people. We got goals. It's that ability to consistently execute upon that. And so, the leading firms that we're seeing, they've got a system, the way they run their business, that supports the execution. And that can be in a variety of ways. It could be a consistent meeting schedules. It could be they're measuring KPIs, key performance indicators, and they're visible. They're communicating them. They're keeping score, if you will. They're assigning ownership to things that really matter, to the key initiatives. They're not afraid to address issues early and tackle them head on. And then they're consistent about just reviewing progress. Where are we? How are we doing? I can remember way back in my career, we used to celebrate, we call firefighters, those who are heroic. We would talk about them in our annual report, for example. This person did a great job, stepped in. That's great. It's great to recognize people, but you don't want to rely on heroics, right? You don't want to rely on those one or two key people that are just going to make it. You want to create an organization, the way it executes, that's got greater alignment. You're able to make faster decisions. And really, you want to minimize the number of surprises.
Absolutely. And that seems to be the silver bullet is having that plan. When you have a plan, when you're off plan, which is just as important as meeting the objectives. And that's where we're seeing those contractors that we're working with that are separating themselves as good, have a plan that works for their business. And remember, there's no one size that fits all, right? I mean, a smaller trade contractor might have I expect would have a far different business plan than a publicly traded general engineering contractor. But at each step of the organization, there should be a plan, and that's what separates the best-in-class contractors at every level.
Yeah, great. All right, let's go on to the next here. Yeah, so the gap between aspiration and action. I have a long list of things that I want to do. I aspire to do. Some are urgent, some are important, some are both. I have to do a little self-reflection, a much shorter list of things I'm actively doing, right? Despite my long list of things I should be doing. So this is probably one of the more important themes that we saw, the more important trends. We talked about companies pretty much now have strategic plans, and we're excited about that, and we think it's a good investment. So they've identified priorities, they've set goals, they've got roadmaps maybe to get there. And it was said early on, now the challenge is about execution. And it's really important. Kevin and I both do a lot of consulting with general contractors and companies in the construction business about creating business strategies. And I always tell them, if we're going to create the plan and it's just going to sit on your shelf, let's stop right now. Let's not even get started. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. Let's acknowledge it. Let's accept it. But let's just stop, because it needs to be a document that is a living document. And it needs to be one that you're holding yourself accountable to, and you're using it to help monitor progress. So we create these thoughtful strategic plans. We set the priorities, and then we get really busy in the day-to-day sort of thing. And maybe we're not clear on ownership, and we're not reviewing progress. So what we're seeing, the leading, go ahead, Kevin, did I jump in there?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So where the magic is creating those plans that you have done, or you're working on, or you're thinking you need to do, and really making out of that, deriving your operating priorities, and then owning it. So what are the objectives for the year? Let's back it down for the next quarter. Who owns that? And are we going to monitor progress and talk about progress, and really keep strategy as part of your weekly management meetings and team meetings. So it just make it part of how your organization runs. Don't make it an event. That strategic is an event that we do once a year. Make it part of how your organization operates. And then we are seeing, and those that are doing that are doing it well, the execution really begins to speed up, begins to accelerate. So, strategic plans, very important, from creating direction, creating the guide rails, if you will. But it's the decision, it's the actions, it's the accountability that comes out of it that's going to be key.
Absolutely. It reminds me, I'm a big Simon Sinek fan and subscribe to some of his stuff. And just recently it came out as we were prepping for this. Pure pragmatism can't imagine a bold future, and pure idealism can't get anything done. It's when the two cooperate that the magic happens.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's really kind of what we're talking about here is combining that pragmatism with that idealism and creating that future state that you want to be and putting pen to paper, but more importantly, boots to the ground, rubber to the ground to make these changes happen. And those are the ones that are differentiating themselves in the market that we're seeing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. And I think finally the last one we want to talk about as far as is what good looks like is this area of de-risking growth. So we talked about growth coming in. We talked about strong backlogs and growth from our survey data, from the data we collected, as we've talked about. This is real data. Growth is a top priority for the companies that we've talked to, and we understand that. What we are seeing is leaders are beginning to understand and becoming more and more aware that growth can also be a risk. It can create risk as well as great opportunities, right? So the firms that tell us they're struggling with growth, it's not that they're struggling to grow, it's they're struggling, the growth has happened faster than their organization can absorb it, is really the concern here. So, your revenue goes up, your backlog goes up, your number of customers go up, your geography expands, but everything else doesn't keep pace. The capacity of your leadership, your systems, your processes, your whole organizational infrastructure just can't keep pace with that growth. And we talked about the effect that has on culture already and on other things. And so that creates that operational strain. It creates those key individuals start feeling that pressure. We start worrying about burnout and that sort of thing. So we often look at great growth. The company must be healthy. You got to be careful about that. In reality, that growth might expose some weaknesses in your organization that you didn't see before, as things become overloaded and just more difficult to do. So again, we've talked about this a little bit, but this idea of being proactive. So the strongest organizations that we talk to and review are the ones that are just think about it a little bit differently. They're investing in leadership before maybe they even think they need it, identifying those successors, putting those career paths in place. They're looking at their systems and their processes before they break. How could we even be better at this? Making sure they've got enough infrastructure of people and the corporate functions, the HR and the IT and that to handle the expanded growth. Becoming a little more disciplined about what they pursue. We encourage folks to, always have a go, no go, a bid, no bid, call it what you want to, where maybe, a dozen questions doesn't mean if you answer no, that you're not going to pursue that project, just makes you stop and think about it. So the kind of questions that should be on that would be some of these. Do we have the leadership? Do we have the bandwidth? Can we support this project? You might have to say no to something that looks like a short-term opportunity just to preserve your long-term growth. So again, usually we'd say the goal is not to grow as fast as possible. Grow as fast as your organization can take care of it, can absorb it. I often think a lot of times that, revenue we win one big project, revenue grows overnight, essentially. Everything else does not grow overnight. Everything else you need to be deliberate about: your leadership, your capacity, your systems, your culture, all of that. You need to understand the difference between those two.
And one of the common threads that we're seeing are best-in-class contractors. Everything that they do is very deliberate and very intentional around the things that matter. And that's what we're talking about here. As you build your growth plans, we are not, of course, saying that we shouldn't be growing. Everybody should be growing, whatever that looks like, whether that's top line, whether that's capacity, whether, people want to work for a growing organization. Do it smartly, do it intentionally, and do it deliberately, is probably the thread that weaves through what the cracks are people are not being deliberate, and what good looks like is really putting into practice that deliberate nature.
Yeah, building an organization that is capable of sustaining growth. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, guys. That was great. So I think we're going to prepare right now to answer some of the questions that came in. So if you didn't already put a question in, now's a great time to submit your questions so we can use our remaining time to get to them. So just want to provide some high-level summary just for a few of our stakeholder groups that we know are dialed in today. So starting with our contractors, just the firms that are going to win are going to protect their field force. They're going to tighten the focus and de-risk their growth, all without losing their culture that makes them so special. So ask yourself, does your succession plan exist on paper, or does your team actually believe in it? We survey our firms, and some people assure us they have a succession plan, and we survey the field, and nobody can actually name who it is. Is there a gap between how your office and your field staff perceive the company, how they experience the company? Good time to check in on it. We talked a little bit about protecting that middle. Think about who are the 5 or 6 people that you can't afford to lose, and what are you doing to protect them? What are you doing to keep them and show them the attention and appreciation that they deserve? And are you doing it, or is it the first time that they're hearing it? Is it when Brand X comes knocking at their door? For our agents and brokers out there, doing PNC or surety, companies, your book, companies are interpreting record backlogs as a sign of health when there could be a capacity risk there. Our field survey results are running more negative than the office results. So this is not a perception problem. It's a structural rift in the companies. It's good to be aware of it. Be proactive. Talk about it with your companies. Our bankers out there, you're going to see overhead maybe running slightly ahead of revenue. It's worth asking why. Dig and ask why, but understand the firms that we're watching closely, they're making intentional investments in their people, their structure, and operational capacity. All the stuff we just mentioned in de-risking growth. So they're building a foundation now to take advantage of the market opportunities in the future. And those of you, the accountants and their CPAs, the warning signs almost always have an organizational root cause before they present themselves in the financials, right? The financials are always backwards looking. You're going to see margin compression and overhead creep that's happening. And we're seeing founder-dependent leadership models in the organizations that are reaching their limits. And as they think about what's next, as they go through the succession planning, it's a great time to review their operations. So let's move to some of those questions. So I'll start with a question on culture, guys. So Kevin or Bill, if you want to take it, you take it wherever you want. What are firms doing now to improve the culture within their firms?
Yeah, let me take a first crack at that. So, and we talked about this a little bit. So first, recognizing that it's important. Let's start there, right? It's important, not so much, or not only in recruiting, but especially in retention and engagement, and recognizing the real cost that losing an employee. It's not just the person. You're losing the relationships. You're using the knowledge that they have brought to you and the knowledge they've gained from you. And there's that turnover cost is significant. And so recognize that, and then being very deliberate, being open about the challenges for it, and being very deliberate about trying to make sure we keep that culture that was there when you were a small company and people were accessible and communication was open and you walked around the office and you had a couple small projects. And really thinking hard about how are we going to maintain this. So it takes a tremendous amount of effort, and it's not just the HR department. It's not just the marketing department. It's everybody on that leadership team needs to model that behavior. And you need to talk about it on a regular basis. And I would get feedback is the other key. Do employee surveys across the company, make them anonymous so people feel free to talk, but get regular feedback on how they're feeling about working for your organization.
And you do that, and I would just add, Bill, that when you do that, to be very genuine and deliberate about that. And if you do surveys, if you get some information back from your team, you need to act on it and explain to them at some level within reason why you're doing or not doing whatever it was suggested or not. And you also hit on something about being really open and honest about, the challenges that the organization faces. And, when you say, hey, we have this challenge, everybody wants to come in and help. And you'll find that from your organization if you're genuine about it. And the flip side, celebrate your wins. There's something to celebrate. If there's not something to celebrate in each of your organizations every day, and I'm not suggesting that it warrants a big certificate or gold medal every day, but there should be little wins all along the way that I would encourage leaders to celebrate, and do so genuinely, and not the rah-rah cheerleader, but the genuine support for your team and the good that they're doing.
Yep. Good. Question came in on ESOPs. So I'll try to paraphrase this. ESOPs they're out there. We see a lot of them all the time. So, and the questions along the lines of, succession planning, and not everyone's included in the conversations. Do you see the recent increase in ESOPs helping this situation? So now are companies including employees early on, or are they surprised now that people are going ESOP? And then the second part of the question is, what kind of feedback are we hearing from employees around ESOPs? So a lot there, guys. Anyway, Kevin, you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, I think the question really helps frame some of what we've been talking about succession planning, and the importance to look at ownership succession as totally different from leadership succession, is totally different than that institutional knowledge transfer succession that needs to happen in any organization. I think ESOPs are fantastic models, but they are only going to fix or address the ownership transition, and they're not addressing the leadership transition unless they're being deliberate with that as well, and educating the workforce on the value of the ESOP, on how they work. There's a lot. It takes a lot of education to educate your workforce around what an ESOP is, what it means for the employee. But I would just caution that just because you go ESOP, that does not fix the leadership or institutional knowledge succession that's necessary in any successful plan.
Yeah, a number of our roundtable members are ESOPs, and the feedback is, it's generally, I'd say, very positive about that approach to transition. If it's not a generational transition one to the next, it's another way to maintain and keep the ownership with the people that have been loyal to you. I'm not an ESOP expert. I know it does put some real demands on company performance in order to continue with a successful ESOP, that they've got to make certain numbers in order to continue the process.
Yep. Thanks, guys. And I think you guys hit on it. ESOPs or ownership transfer. So is private equity. Succession planning is different, right? It's right people in the right seats, and having some organizational strength to make whatever you do successful is important. And that conversation starts early. Running low on time. There's a couple other questions coming at the wire like they always do. So maybe real quick hit on this question. So what are some healthy ways to hold project teams accountable for what's happening on their projects?
Yeah, so I can start that one, and we see this across the board. So first, clearly being upfront with the team about the why behind the project. Why is this project important? What is the results we're looking for? What's the impact it's going to have? And then, just like any company, think of it as a business. We've talked about the need for decision making, clarifying who's making decisions, who's accountable for what, getting good alignment around the schedule. And we're finding, the clearer you can be about the expectations at both the team level and then the individual contributors within that team, the more cohesive and successful that project will be.
Kevin, you got something, or you want to move?
I was just going to say that the ones that do it the best invest a tremendous amount of time in that handoff process, and that's where the issues get resolved, accountability gets laid, and everybody really feels heard and bought in.
It's a lot like strategy. I say one of the things about strategic plan, it's the bigger purpose, the bigger product out of a strategic planning exercise is getting everybody aligned. Think of that on the project as well. Clear alignment on where the project's going, and then communicate. Nothing festers or causes problems more than people are not feeling that they can communicate openly and raise their issues.
Got it. Maybe answer this question in less than 30 seconds. Someone asked, companies trying to narrow down top-down priorities for their company. They want to create valuable change and leadership focus. How are we helping? How do you guys help people focus and prioritize?
Boy, between the surveys and the interviews, talking to the people that are the front lines and creating an environment where they can be very candid and tell you really what's going on in the inner workings of the organization really help us identify what those priorities are for an organization to work on.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please reach out with any questions that the group has. Our contact information is available on the screen. So we exist to support the construction industry, and the roundtables exist because construction leaders are better together than they are alone. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.